Good day, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Albert Arena, Director of the Waltham Museum, a museum whose collection is on the history of Waltham. As part of our program, we have 16 historical slideshows on Waltham. As you can see, the one we have for you today is Mill Number 1, or the history of the Boston Manufacturing Company, Waltham's historical cotton mill. Now, if most of you were to look at a book, most books, history books, look in the index on the Waltham or Francis Cabot Lowell, you'll see a section on the item we'll be talking about today, this Mill Number 1, the first factory in the United States. It's taught all over the United States and to any others who learn the history of America. In 1975, the Life magazine put out an issue on 100 most significant events in the history of the United States, and the building of Mill Number 1 by Francis Cabot Lowell was one of them. So let's get to the story. Now, for those of you who are not too familiar with Waltham and where we'll be talking about, you can look at this aerial view of Waltham. In the center is Waltham Common. Then you see the Charles River. On this side of the Charles River is the Moody Street Bridge. And on this side of the Moody Street Bridge is the Boston Manufacturing Company. It's now senior citizen housing, but this is the area we'll be talking about, along with the Common, because the mill people owned the Common up until 1854. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with Waltham and downtown area and what we'll be talking about, this is it. Now, up until the end of the Revolutionary War, Waltham was a farming community. Most of the farms were up around Trapello Road, and the farmers were closely knit. They attended church at Piety Corner, the corner of Beaver Street and Lexington Street. They had their meeting house there, and they of course determined what went on in the town. There was less than just about 1,000 people at that time, around 1790, and but Waltham had a natural resource that would draw industry into the town. It had a number of brooks with rapids, such as Stony Brook, Beaver Brook, and Clementis Brook. And the river itself, Charles River, had rapids, which would provide water power for industry. After the Revolutionary War, up into the 19th century, there was no steam power or electric power. Industry had to rely on water power, and Waltham had a lot of it. Let's take Stony Brook, for instance, at the Waltham Western Line. That was made into a dam, and a paper mill moved in there at the end of the 18th century. Upham's Paper Mill. Later became Roberts Paper Mill, and the dam was controlled by the Sibley family. Down at the Waltham Watertown line, there was a Gore paper mill operated by Governor Gore. We'll be getting to that a little bit later. But in downtown Waltham was the big waterfall, the one that still operates right east of the Moody Street Bridge. This waterfall, this dam was erected in 1785 by Theodore Lyman. And the first one that utilized the water power was John Boys and his paper mill. So there were 3 paper mills operating on the Charles River and at Stony Brook in the year 1800. There was Upham's Paper Mill at Stony Brook. There was John Boise's paper mill at the Moody Street Bridge. And there was the Governor Gore paper mill down at the Watertown line. Now, this is Francis Cabot Lowell. It's a silhouette of Francis Cabot Lowell. There's no portraits of him. It's hard to understand because he came from a wealthy family. He was born in Newburyport, Mass, April 9th, 1775, just a couple of weeks before the Battle of Lexington and Concord. And his father was a judge. He was a wealthy, like I say, he was from a wealthy family. And he graduated from Harvard in 1796. He went to England with his wife in 1810 for health reasons. When he was over in England, he visited Edinburgh, and he noticed the operation of the textile mills. They were closely guarded operations in England. They didn't want anybody to learn how to make any type of manufactured products, especially cloth and textiles. It was against the law to take any papers out of the textile machinery from England or any other machinery. But Francis Cabot Lowell, he was on a health vacation, and he visited these mills, and he memorized the operation of the machinery as best he could. And it fascinated him, and he had the intention of, when he got back to America, to start up a mill in the United States. He met a cousin of his, Nathan Appleton, and they both agreed to be the core to an organization to start a mill back in the United States. But first he had to get this information back to the United States, and his ship on the way back was confiscated by the British, and his room was searched for information on the textile machinery, which he didn't have because he had it all in his head. You want to remember now, the War of 1812 was just about to erupt at this time. So he was diverted through Halifax, Canada, and eventually got back to the United States, and he formed the Boston Associates out of Boston. And in that group of young entrepreneurs, there were himself and Patrick Tracy Jackson, his brother-in-law, Nathan Appleton, a financial backer. Then there was a fellow from born in Waltham, Uriah Cotting. And they decided to put up this cotton mill, but they didn't know where. But Uriah Cotting said there was a large water mill, water power, in Waltham, and it'd be an ideal place to locate the mill. It's owned by John Boise, and they did. They bought out John Boise and planned to put their mill in Waltham. If this water power had been a Newton or a Natick, then all this history would be in those towns and cities. Now this is what the mill looked like that they put up in Waltham. It was 45 feet wide and 90 feet long. It had 3 main stories, but it also had an attic and it had a basement. And the operation would go like this. The cotton, which would come up from the south by shipping ships, such as the Flying Cloud, go into Boston, and from Boston be taken out to Waltham by horse and wagon. The cotton would be first go through a picker process, then it go through the first floor carding machines. That's where the cotton would be combed and disentangled and stretched out in preparation of spinning. Then it go up to the second floor where the spinning machines were located, and the spinning machines would turn the cotton into yarn, thread, or string. Then it go up to the third floor, and the third floor is where the looms were, and the looms would weave the yarn or the string into cloth. And from the attic, it'd go to a freight elevator down the other side, down to the ground, be shipped out to customers throughout New England and the world, in the United States. All this machinery was operated by water power. Now, this is why it's so historical. This was the first mill in the United States and the world, as a matter of fact, where all the processes of making a finished product took place under one roof. It occurred here in Waltham, Mass. in 1813. Raw cotton would come in, as I said, and finished cloth would go out at the top. And this was the beginning of the Industrial Revolution in the United States, and the independence from England and other countries for the production of factory-made goods. Now, it's very interesting. While this was going on, the War of 1812 was going on. The British had overrun Washington, D.C. They burned the Capitol. The President of the United States was James Madison, and the population at that time of Waltham was only 1,100 people. But that was what was going on in Waltham. While the building was going up in 1813, Francis Cabot Lowell got together with a Paul Moody, another one of the Boston Associates, to design the machinery that was going to be going in here. And they did it on a wharf in Boston. They brought it out to Waltham and installed in this mill in its operation. Now, here's a schematic diagram of where this mill is located. There's the dam there, there's the Charles River, and you can see the mill there, obviously in black. The south side was owned by Newton. At that time, Moody Street was known as the lane to the river, and Elm Street was known as the lane to the mill. Main Street was the Grand Way, later be called the Boston Post Road, and of course it's Main Street today. But that's where it is. Now if you were to look at a map, a planned map today, that is where mill number 1 is today. You can see the Moody Street Bridge and its location to the Moody Street Bridge. So when you're walking across the Moody Street Bridge, you can look up at the end of the factory complex, and you'll see 1813 alongside the building. Now this is Paul Moody. Every great industry needs an engineering or a scientist to get all the equipment going and working properly. And we're fortunate to have Paul Moody work with Francis Cabot Lowell. He was quite a man. He left home at 12 years old, worked in textile mills, self-taught, even went into business himself in the textile business as himself as the owner. These other mills, there were small mills throughout the United States. There was the Slater Mill and so forth, but they weren't complete mills. They'd take the cotton and maybe make yarn, or another building would use hand-operated looms to make cloth. But the one in Waltham, as I said, made cloth from cotton in one building under one roof. Now to drive all this machinery was a water wheel. It's in the basement of mill number 1. And there's that archway which would let the water in from the Charles River. And if you go down that mill today, in the basement, you can still see that archway. It's all bricked in now. But in 1813, it was allowing the Charles River to drive this water wheel. The water would not go over the top of the wheel, it would go under the wheel and turn the wheel away from us. And the gear on the left would drive a smaller gear above it, which would drive helical gears, a vertical shaft, horizontal shafts, belts, and drive all the machinery in the mill. Now one of the problems with the operation of the mill, this water wheel would speed up and slow down and speed up and slow down. And Paul Moody asked Francis Cabot Lowell, well, how they handle it over in England. He said, well, they had sort of flyweights that would operate on centrifugal force. And he explained it from his memory. And it didn't take Paul Moody long to understand how a governor would work, a flyweight governor. And he installed one on this water wheel, which made the speed of the water wheel uniform. And as the way it works is the weights go out, it would operate some linkage and some counterweights and cut down the water supply to the water wheel and slow it down, and vice versa. If the water wheel slows down, the weights would collapse and open up more water to the water wheel. Now that governor that he designed, within a week, operated for 20 years in driving this water wheel. So he's quite a fantastic person. Now let's go over this again. Down south, they're picking cotton, of course, and their biggest customer, of course, was England and other foreign countries. But now they were shipping it up by sailing ships to Boston and to New England. When it got to Waltham or other places, that go through a pickering process where the cotton would be cleaned up. It was a dirty job, and most times this picker building was in a separate building because the dust and the dirt would clog up the other machinery. Now here's a carding machine, a real old picture of a carding machine, probably the type they had in the first floor of that cotton mill. And you can see the belt driving the carding machine, and this machine would comb the cotton, disentangle it and comb it and get it ready for spinning into yarn, thread, and string. There's the cotton going in on the left and the disentangled cotton coming out on the right. Now this is a later picture, but on the second floor were the spinning machines. And these are the machines that turn the cotton into yarn and string. Then it'd be put on different rolls. It'd be put on a wifts and wafts, they called them, in preparation of going to the looms to be woven into cloth. It's the process there. Now this is the loom. This is the key to any cotton mill. It turns the thread into sheets of clothing. Now this caption here says, "The invention of power looms threw many weavers out of work. To save their jobs, they tried to destroy the machines." Now, it's an age-old problem. Every time a modern device comes in, computerized devices, the labor force thinks they'll be losing jobs, and some of them do, but more jobs are created. But here's a real old picture of a loom, not as old as the one used by Francis Cabot Lowell and Paul Moody, but you get the idea. Here's another view of an old loom. If anyone had been at the sheep shearing open house at the Governor Gore Estate a couple of weeks ago, they had wool looms working, hand-operated wool looms, and visitors could actually weave cloth on the premises. They'd shear the sheep, and the wool would be spun into yarn, and you could they allowed the visitors to weave it into cloth. Very interesting. Now this was the symbol of the Boston Manufacturing Company with a picture of their loom in the center, their power-driven loom. Now, over in England, Francis Cabot Lowell noticed the terrible conditions of the mills, the utilization of child labor, and the poor benefits they gave the families. He would never have he never allowed this in Waltham. He was just the opposite. As you'll see, he became a real fine influence on the town of Waltham. But even in some United States mills, they utilized labor. And if you read the book Mill Childs by Ruth Holland, will tell about these terrible years where they used children as young as 7, 8 years old. Here we see a girl, probably wish she was out playing or going to school, forced to work in a mill. And it was dangerous too. They were near moving machinery, belts, and many of them were hurt. But what Francis Cabot Lowell's plan was to hire farm girls from up throughout New England. He sent agents around to get girls between 18 and 22 to come work in the mill in Waltham. And he assured them they'll be housed in mill housing units, some of which are still standing on River Street, long row houses, and well supervised. In this way, they could accumulate some cash for either their dowry or for their family, and the mill in turn would get nimble fingers to work the cotton machinery. And it worked out very well, although he didn't get too many from Waltham because the farmers of Waltham were opposed to the mill people in Waltham. Now in 1817, Francis Cabot Lowell dies at the age of 42. He was, like I said, he was in poor health. His wife had died 2 years earlier. But Patrick Tracy Jackson was really a mechanical genius. He was behind him all along for his first 4 or 5 years of operation. And there was no slowdown. As a matter of fact, there was a pickup because Patrick Tracy Jackson was a financial genius, a managerial genius. His father was in the shipping business, Patrick Tracy on the left, and he himself, young Patrick, was even a captain of a ship at the age of 16. It's hard to believe, but that's what the history books say. But he took all the dreams of Francis Cabot Lowell and put them into effect in Waltham, and even did more than that, as you'll see. First of all, in 1817, he acquired this fire vehicle from Hooneman Company in Boston and started the first fire department in Waltham in 1817, operated by the mill people. In a slideshow, the history of the fire department, we tell about how the mill people started the fire department in Waltham. Then in 1818, he puts up mill number 2. That's the building on the right. It's longer than mill number 1. Mill number 1's the one with the cupola on top. That's a bell tower, and then there's a weather vane above the bell tower. You can see the waterfalls in Waltham on the left. Little building on the right to the waterfalls is the picker building where they clean up the cotton. It used to be the foundation of John Boyce's paper mill because they utilized a different water wheel to operate the machinery in that building. But that's what it looked like in 1818 in Waltham. Mill number 1 and mill number 2. You might notice the freight elevator on mill number 2, which takes the processes, the finished cloth down to the ground level. And if you were to look at the map today, this is mill number 1 and mill number 2. Here again is that same painting. The painting was done by Elijah Smith, the great American artist painter after the Revolutionary War. And quite frankly, just 2 or 3 months ago, this painting was auctioned off at Skinner's Auction in Bolton, Mass. and went for $30,000. We would have liked to have acquired it, but it cost $30,000. Here's the back of mill number 1 and mill number 2. Now, mill number 2 was they made all the corrections from mistakes that they have made in mill number 1. Once again, mill number 1 and number 2. And that was the prototype of mills throughout New England for years. Now, this is a picture of a mill down in Fall River. You can see it has the same design, a double pitch roof, the 2 small windows in the attic, and then there's 4 windows on the smaller side. So that was the prototype of all the mills that would follow in years to come throughout New England. Now in 1819, he buys out the Waltham Wool and Cotton Company. The Waltham Wool and Cotton Company were operating at the old Governor Gore paper mill site at the Waltham Western Line. And Patrick Tracy Jackson buys them out in 1819 and starts the Waltham Bleachery and Dye Works in 1820. He didn't tear down all the buildings. He just erected one building first for doing the bleaching and dyeing, and still utilized the wool and cotton production that was going on, but slowly phased out that aspect of the business. But it was the first bleachery and dye works in the world, and it would last until the 1950s. We'll be getting back to the Waltham Bleachery and Dye Works later on in the slideshow. But to join his 2 mills, his mill in Waltham and the bleachery, they developed River Street. The company themselves built River Street, and with their own funds. And he called the mill in downtown Waltham the upper place, and he called the bleachery the lower place. And the mill people were hoping that those names would catch on, but they never quite caught on. It was always known as the bleachery and the cotton mill. But here's a nice painting of, you can see River Street on the right. It winds around those long row houses which house the farm girls. And this picture is taken where Sacred Heart Church is today. You can see the Charles River on the left, and nestled in there is Beaver Brook somewhere dumping into the Charles River. At that time, General Lawton owned a large estate there, and also the Jackson family owned a large estate, which will eventually become Francis Cabot Lowell II's estate. But as I say, Patrick Tracy Jackson was a real entrepreneur. He was going to get into everything. He was going to get in the banking business, the shipping business, the cotton business, and even the chemical business. He helped his friend Samuel Dana set up the Newton Chemical Company across the Charles River from the cotton mill. and the chemical company would last from 1822 to 1877. It was backed up by the cotton people and Patrick Tracy Jackson. Also in 1822, the mill people, who were very ambitious, realized that the waterfall in Waltham was insufficient to supply all their needs, and they looked around New England for a larger area for more water power. And they saw in East Chelmsford the Pawtucket Mills on the Merrimack River, and they quietly acquired the rights to the Pawtucket Mills and start making expanding their operations up there as the Merrimack Textile Company. And as time went on, East Chelmsford became its own little town, and they had to give a name for it. And the Boston Associates decided to name it Lowell after the founder, Francis Cabot Lowell. And Lowell eventually will become a greater producer of cotton in Waltham. It's very odd that 20 years ago, the city of Lowell was getting huge grants from the government to restore and make all their mills historical under the guise that they were the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution. And they got $20 million to provide, restore all the canals and mills for historical visitors. But as you can see, the true birthplace of the Industrial Revolution was Waltham. Now, in 1826, Patrick Tracy Jackson's last year, he only was the president for 10 years, he started the Rumford Institute in Waltham. He's carrying out Francis Cabot Lowell's dreams to be a fine influence on the town people of Waltham. And he puts up Rumford Hall on Waltham Common, which the mill people owned. And Rumford Hall would be used, they allowed it to be used as the meeting place for the town people. They allowed it to be used as the library, and they had lectures here, fine, wholesome lectures such as how to do a good deed for the day and things like that, take care of your health. They had people speak there such as later as Mark Twain and so forth. They were doing good things for the town in 1826. They put up a school. There's a school on Elm Street near the mill complex. This is a later picture of it. It's right where you went to the car wash today. The foundation's still there, but the top of the school is gone. And for a while, they even held church services there till they erected a church on the common. Now, in 1833, Patrick Tracy Jackson had left. He's retired. He didn't pass away yet. But Ebenezer Hobbs is now in charge of the Boston Manufacturing Company. And they install a canal. As you see, that curved part on the northern part of the mill number 1 and 2 is the canal. And it provides a more positive flow to the water wheel in mill number 2. However, in 1834, the Charles River has a drought, and production is badly hurt by the drought in the Charles River because the water wheels aren't operating properly. Just fortunately enough that steam engines were now coming into their own. Thanks to George Corliss, steam engines became efficient and were being installed in many mills in New England. And they installed the steam engine, the Corliss steam engine, in the basement of mill number 1 to supplement or take over the operation of all the mill machinery when the water level was low. But here's a view of the entrance to the canal, taken about 100 years ago. Was filled in about 30 years ago. But you can see that plank going across would operate a stop. If the water was too high, they'd close the gates and cut down the water supply to the water wheels, and vice versa. If the water was low, they'd open up the gates. See, the gates are open now. And here we see the gates are closed to the canal. Would later become in the 30s and 40s a fine place for boys to swim. But here's the steam engine they installed in the basement of mill number 1, drove them all the cotton machinery, as I said, along with the water wheel. And later on, 50 years later, they'll move this steam engine to the bleachery and put in a larger one as the mill continues to expand in downtown Waltham. At the Waltham Museum, we have a 75 horsepower steam engine, a boiler to show the visitors what old industrial power is all about. Once again, there's mill number 1 and mill number 2, the waterfall on the left. Now, this is a very rare picture of Waltham Common in 1835. We're standing on Moody Street, and the mill church is right there on the common with the crescent-shaped driveway. If you look closely, way over in the left, lower left corner, you can see Rumford Hall, that meeting place we talked about. This is a drawing, you want to remember. Photography wasn't invented at this time. So everything you see is either drawings or paintings. Over on the right is the agent's house, one of the top executives of the Boston Manufacturing Company, and a tree behind it. If you look beyond the tree, you can see the bell tower of mill number 1. And if you look to the left of the church, you'll see the Longhouse, where another building where they housed mill workers that worked in the mill. In 1843, they connect mill number 1 to mill number 2. And at the same time, they put a railroad, they extend the railroad from Boston into Waltham to deliver the cotton. And it goes right by the mill, of course. They also have the town put up the first Moody Street Bridge, a wooden bridge. And at that time is when they changed the name of the lane to the river to Moody Street. And in doing so, they increased the height of the dam. They removed that 50-year-old dam put up by Theodore Lyman. It was a wooden dam, and they put a granite dam in to give it more height, because they have to supply more water power to the connection between mill number 1 and mill number 2. By the way, the capacity of this cotton mill now is 20,000 spindles. Originally it was 3,000 with mill number 1. That's how they rate a cotton mill, by the number of spindles in the cotton mill. For instance, a spinning machine might have from anywhere from 30 to 300 spindles. And if you have 10 spinning machines with 300 spindles, that's 3,000 spindles. That's the rating of the mill. Right now they're up to 20,000 spindles. They'll eventually get up to 80,000. But they changed the dam from wooden to granite, increased the height. In doing so, they also have trouble with Roberts Paper Mill, legal problems with Roberts Paper Mill, and further on down they have trouble with the Bemis Paper Mill in Watertown, because we sort of taken away from their water power. The water power loss at the bleachery, they don't mind because it's their own company. Incidentally, I forgot to mention it, but way back in 1814, when Paul Moody designed the first loom, others were stealing his design, and they had to take legal action back there. And the lawyer they used was Daniel Webster from New Hampshire. And as Daniel Webster became famous nationwide as a senator, he was always helpful to the Boston Manufacturing Company. But here we see, this is a 1900 picture, but here we see the train station, the Fitchburg Railroad that they installed coming from Boston in 1843. And over to the right, you can see the cotton storehouse, where the cotton was stored prior to it being processed. A few other things were happening around this time. First of all, well anyway, there's the dam that they changed, Lyman's wooden dam to the granite dam in 1847. This same year, Patrick Tracy Jackson had died, and also a thing far away was happening which will have an influence on Waltham, and that was the potato famine in Ireland. They're still using farm girls here, but a potato famine is in Ireland, and a great number of immigrants will now come to Waltham and New England and the United States and looking for jobs. Also in 1850, along this time, the child labor law is passed in the United States, forbidding anyone using child labor under 14 in some cases, or 16 in others. And they, as I said, they continue to use the farm girls to operate this machinery. There's a girl operating a spinning machinery. But the immigrants started to come in from Ireland and Russia, Lithuania, and so forth. And here's a picture of some immigrants over 100 years ago at the Boston Manufacturing Company. In 1852, they doubled the capacity of the mill by adding mill number 4, a large block on the right there. And doing so, they put in 3 new water wheels in the basement of mill number 4. You can see the canal top leading the water to mill number 4. That's what it looked like back in 1852 to 1854. Now, the population of Waltham in 1854 around this time was up to 5,000. From 1,000 back in 1810, it's up to 5,000 now, thanks a lot to the mill people moving in. To give you an idea of the times, Franklin Pierce was president of the United States. He was the 14th president. Abraham Lincoln was still a lawyer back in Illinois. And there were 31 states in the Union. And the big issue in the Union right at that time in the 1850s was whether Kansas would be a free state or a slave state. But right here in Waltham, here's a mill operating for over 40 years. There's a view of that mill from the 1854 map. You can see the long section on the left is mill number 1, 2, and a connection, and the section on the right is mill number 4. They had moved the bell tower from the top of mill number 1 to the center, where you can see in this picture. The bell tower would always ring for the workers to come to work, take their lunches, and leave work. And that was the setup of the cotton mill in 1854. If you were to look on a plan, the Charles River is on the southern part of this map. The mill complex is right above it. There's the town common. You can still see the church, Rumford Hall, and the Boston Manufacturing Company on it. And River Street with the homes. River Street at one time went all the way to Moody Street. And it slowly take over the homes and move these homes. As a matter of fact, in 1856, as I mentioned earlier, they will sell the Rumford Hall, they would sell the town common to the town of Waltham, with the stipulation that the town common would always be used as a park or open space for the citizens of the town. And little by little, they moved these buildings off into different locations. For instance, the church was moved to the corner of Moody and Main Street. Later became the Methodist Church. The agent's building was moved. The houses on River Street were moved as the common was organized. And some of you in Waltham might hear stories about homes you live in were once part of or adjacent to the town common. Now also at that time in 1852, the Waltham Gas Company started up across the river. And their first customer was the Boston Manufacturing Company. And here you see an early picture of the Boston Gas Company off of Pine Street. Prior to the gas company moving in, giving them gas light, they used whale oil lamps for lighting in the mills. Now here's a picture you've probably seen before of Waltham at that time, 1856, when it was a mill town. The church we talked about in the common is on the right, Rumford Hall's on the right, and the bank buildings with the post in front of them is on the left, the corner of Lexington and Main Street, 1856. Now they go to a depression, a recession at this time, and it doesn't influence the mill too much because there's a great demand. There's always the demand for cloth. But here's that same location pretty much. You can see the bank building at the corner of Lexington and Main Street. The reason we have it so clear now is photography has been invented. And there's Main Street, as I said, and Lexington Street around the side of the bank building. That building on the right is the central block where Johnson's Drug is located, even today. Now, new industry was coming into Waltham, was having its problems. The Waltham Watch Company, known as, had a different name at that time, Apple Tracy Company. In one of our slide shows, we have the history of the Waltham Watch Company. But eventually they will succeed and outdo the Waltham's cotton mill. Now this is interesting. That same year, 1857, when the watch factory just moved in and the cotton mill was at its pretty much at its peak, one of its old bobbin boys, Nathaniel P. Banks, he operated as a bobbin boy. His mother and father worked at the mill, and he was self-taught. And this is the cover of Harper's Weekly, the Journal of Civilization, November 21, 1857. The bobbin boy from Waltham had become governor of Massachusetts. There's a picture of Nathaniel P. Banks. He later became a general in the Union Army. But things are going so well for the Boston Manufacturing Company that in 1873 they construct mill number 10, one of their largest mills. And then once again, they're going to add another 20,000 spindles to the operation of the mill. In doing so now, they cannot rely, of course, on water power. So they install a huge boiler room. The southernmost building in that plan drawing is the new boiler room. And it'll have, along with the new boiler room, they have two 600 horsepower steam engines and 6 coreless water tube vertical boilers. A tremendous operation that would operate most of the machinery in that complex. And also mill number 3 is constructed to the north of the building to be used as a new picker building. So as you can see, they're really moving along in 1873. Here's an insurance plan of the operations at that time. It means a lot to people doing research because you can see way over on the right it says number 1 mill, old mill number 1, mill number 2, 4, 10. Those black dots you see there are 6 boilers next to the engine room and the pump room. If you ever go to a meeting there, it's called the Appleton Room now. They conduct public meetings there. It's a fine little meeting place, but you'll be sitting in the same area where the early engines and boilers were in 1875. This is really 2 drawings. A 3-dimensional drawing is the top of what the building looks like in 3-dimensional viewing, and it's a schematic drawing at the bottom. And you can see the canal layout, the coal sheds, and other buildings at that time. Here's a photograph of a boiler room very similar to the boiler room they had at that time. The 6 vertical coreless water tube boilers, coal-fired. They utilize almost 6,000 tons of coal a year in this mill. And the engines drove, the 2 600 coreless engines drove 28-foot diameter flywheels with 8-foot face and rope drive to drive the tremendous amount of machinery in all these buildings. For instance, that's what a cross-compound coreless engine would look like at that time. This is taken from an 1875 map. You can see the mill complex on the left near the Moody Street Bridge where the White Swan is, and you can see the bleachery way over on the right. And in between, by the way, that Jackson estate has become the Francis Caballero II's estate. And he sort of overlooks his 2 properties like a plantation owner down south. He has a huge, huge estate on the Beaver Brook area. Here we're zeroing in on the downtown Waltham in 1875, the mill complex on the right, the Moody Street Bridge, the churches, the common, and so forth. Here you can see the gas company on the other side, Waltham Gas Company, and a trestle. The trestle was taking a clot. Instead of going down Old River Street now, this trestle will take the clot to the bleachery by rail from the downtown cotton mill. There's River Street in 1870. It was very beautiful. They had a lot of wealthy estates on River Street at that time. But as the mill people went out of business, that subdivide and turn these estates into many homes, as we know it today. But here's the estate of Francis Cabot Lowell. Is a rustic bridge over Beaver Brook, 1850s. Now he had two sons, John Lowell and Patrick Lowell, Francis Cabot Lowell II. John Lowell was president for a while, but he was more interested in traveling around the world and collecting items. One of the items he collected was Egyptian stones and tombs and mummies and stuff like that. And if you go to the Museum of Fine Arts, there's practically a whole room of historical stones donated by John Lowell of Waltham. When he passed away, he had all the stones donated to the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. But here we see Francis Cabot Lowell II standing in front of his mansion, big plantation overlooking his huge estate. This is now a 5-unit apartment house, still standing. And if you go into the parking lot of Sacred Heart and look up on a hill, you can see this building. It's at 51 Clark Street. And it's now surrounded, of course, by many, many homes. But one time it was a very glamorous mansion for the mill people. And once again, if you look at the map, if you look at that dark, snaky thing over on the right, that's Beaver Brook. And just south of Beaver Brook, you can see the big mansion. That's the Francis Cabot Lowell estate. So once again, we'll run through the mill again. There's the waterfall and the cotton storehouse on the right, looking towards Moody Street. There's the mill. Around 1880 with the, this mill number 1 on the right with its double pitch roof. They'll later flatten that roof out. But you can see the first boiler room. The boiler room that operated the first engine. There's the mill again, that time. A scene from the Embassy parking lot. Still again, there's the new boiler room way over on the right with its huge engines. 1870s. Still 1870s, the mill. Now in 1884, Waltham becomes a city. And the mill people are starting to lose their authority in the city, and although they're friendly with the watch people, but instead of being a mill town now, we're going to become a watch city. But the mill people and the watch people were friendly. As a matter of fact, in 1854, when Aaron Dennison was looking for a place to locate his watch factory, it was Samuel Emerson from the chief engineer at the mill who helped him find Bemis Farm to locate his watch factory. But nevertheless, time goes on and things fade out and things fade in. And the mill was starting to fade out, although they made profit till 1922. Here we see some mill girls in 1880. Now you see it, in 1888 they flattened the roofs. They've learned the secret of making flat roofs that could withstand snow. That's why they had pitch roofs in the past, so they could strong enough to withstand snow. But that's what it looked like. The waterfall's on the left. We have several pictures of it with the flat roof. See with the flat roof. And you can tell by the larger windows in the top row where they took the attic and made another floor with the larger windows. It's like that today. The first 11 windows on the left, counting left to right, is mill number 1. The next 11 is that connection, and mill number 2 is way over on the right. There's the boiler room, the second boiler room. Now they were doing hosiery work at the bleachery, but they transferred it to the mill at this time in the 1880s. That's the trestle on the right. taking the cloth over to the bleachery. Here we see the mill again, 1891. This is the large building. It's now all senior citizen housing today. Now in 1895, there's a World's Fair in the United States, and what the Boston Manufacturing Company submits is 5 of its pictures of its mill, and the unique thing about it, they were woven on silk at the mill. It was the first time that silk was woven in the United States, and it was done here at the Boston Manufacturing Company. And the first things they did with the weaving the silk was make pictures of the mill itself. That's the Moody Street Bridge on the right and the mill complex in 1895. At that time, they're making silk ginghams, fine colored fabrics, swivel silks, and all kinds of wonderful cloth. Now, the crude machinery we saw earlier has become sophisticated to the point that you'd have to be a mill person to explain it all, but here's a combination beam and lease whopper with heavy baler. This is a heavy tape drive ring twister with beam creel. All kinds of processes go even today in the manufacturing of the finest of cloth. Some of these machines were made by the Sacco Lowell Company in Newton, which originated here by the support of the mill people. Here's a group of mill workers in the early part of this century. Here's the mill on a postcard around the 1905, 1910. Another mill, the mill on a postcard again. In 1911, they put in the 3rd boiler room. You can see it on the left by the trestle. But this is just strictly a boiler room. They'll use the same engines. Those old boilers were 50 years old now. And they'll put in 6 Manning boilers in this new boiler room. And the Manning boilers look like this. And they'll supply the mill with steam for process and for heat until the mill complex goes out of business, and even after, when other industries move into the mill complex. Now here's a couple of mill workers, Salvatore Rizzo and Michael Morabito in 1919. This picture was donated to the museum by Michael Morabito. And at this time I'd like to read a little bit about some mill workers. There was a Miss Eva Pander from Russia and her husband, Nicholas, and they worked in the spinning room on the 4th floor of the mill from 1914 to 1918. The belt-driven spinning machines she operated turned cotton into yarn or thread. They, in turn, were wound on bobbins or spools known as woofs or wafts. Eva lived in one of the mill's several boarding houses and paid a rent of $3 per month. Residents of the boarding house were entitled to a free soup daily. Eva recalls watching blankets being woven. Each blanket had a large flower in the center of the design. Nicholas Pander, her husband, worked in the mill for 2 years, 1923 to 1924, in the rug weaving room. He was paid 10 to 15 cents per hour. The 12 rug-making machines in his department were also belt-driven. Rug making was only a small portion of the mill. Other workers in the mill were Michael Albanese from Sicily in 1913. He worked in the carding room and the loom room. He made $7.15 a week for 54 hours. Then there was Mary Statras from Lithuania. She worked in the 2nd floor of the spinning room, Building 10, from 1909 to 1910, and she made $3.33 for a 60-hour week. Her superintendent was E. Sonia. And these are some of the conditions of the mill. Although they were not as great as the watch factory, they did provide jobs for immigrants coming into the United States. Here we see an aerial view of the mill. And if you look closely, way over in the top right, you can see the row houses which house the mill people. The mill again, that's the last building they put up, the large one behind the depot. Later became the Atlantic Registry building. That was put up in 1890. And on that building, at one time, they had this large sign saying Boston Manufacturing Company, maker of Gilbrain ginghams. Here's an advertisement in the magazine, 1920, the Waltham Fair, by the Boston Manufacturing, Gilbrain ginghams. Here's a loom that did the weaving at a later date. These are two mill girls that worked in a loom. And you see what they have in their hand is a shuttle. That's the heart of a loom. They put small spindles of thread inside the shuttle, and it shoots back and forth as the cloth is being woven. And like I say, if you were at the sheep shearing open house a couple of weeks ago at the Gore Estate, they allowed you to move the shuttle yourself by hand through the yard as the cloth was being woven. And when the women cut the cloth, they used little scissors like this. And these scissors came from, once were used by the mother of Fire Chief George L. Johnson's mother worked at the cotton mill. And these were her yarn cutters, scissors. Here's some cloth donated to the Waltham Museum over the years. This is sample cloth used by salesmen to show others what type of cloth they made. Here's some cotton fleece. We know this is from the mill because it was taken by Stephen Santa Maria in 1924 when he was working at the mill, and it was obtained from him by the Waltham Museum. Here's some Irish linen cloth made at the mill, now an exhibit at the Waltham Museum. Now, up until the end, they were still good to the community. In 1922, they gave an old Swedish church they had at the corner of Jackson Street and River Street to the Italian population of Waltham. And many of them were immigrants and working at the mill, and they gave them their first church. Of course, it's now, the church is long gone, but the Sacred Heart Church now provides their religion today. But they were real good to the community throughout over 120 years of operation. In 1923, the Boston Manufacturing Company's second annual outing. I don't know why it's been over 100 years, but they're just on their second. They probably got the idea from the watch factory to start having outings, but a little bit too late because they'll be going out of business soon. And in the 20s, they start to phase out. At one time, they had a workforce of almost 2,000 employees. But during the 20s, they start phasing out their workforce. They start selling their machinery. And one worker that worked there told me, his name was Anthony Hebert. He worked there as a mill boy, a bobbin boy. He helped clean the machinery before it was shipped out to the cotton mills in South. What the cotton people were doing, moving their operations down south, were closer to the supply of cotton. So the company goes out of business in the late 1930s. That's what it looked like when it went out of business. That's what the canal looked like in 1930, when it went out of business. It was deserted for 3 years. And a lot of fine people at one time worked there. They were Anthony Hebert, as I mentioned, and he gave me a whole list of people. I can't read them all, but Blanche Hayes, forelady in the silk room, Rose Mobilia, silk room worker, Tom Bannon, foreman of number 1 weave room, Elmer Doc Sonia, foreman number 2 weave room, the Burke brothers, workers in the warp room, Mr. Ryan, head of the stock room in building 1, Spike Hennessy, stockroom boys, and on they go. Mary Cardillo, drop wire girl, Catherine Muse, drop wire girl, Joe Shagnon, loom fixer, and on they go. This will conclude our history of the cotton mill in Waltham. At a later date, we'll give you the slideshow more on the bleachery and whatever happened to the old cotton mill buildings. But right from now, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and good day.